3 years ago, Ebrahim Raisi won the presidency in a rigged election. Some analysts suggested it was a premeditated move toward a more distinguished position. Ali Khamenei, the aging and ailing supreme leader, is well beyond the life expectancy of Iranians. Upon his death, it was expected that Raisi would aim to replace him. However, history is not without its irony. Instead of elevating him to the supreme office, winning the presidency cost Raisi his life. On May 19th, while returning from a visit to neighboring Azerbaijan, where Raisi had inaugurated a dam on the border, authorities lost contact with his helicopter. It happened in a mountainous region about 86 kilometers northeast of Tabriz. The next day, state media confirmed Raisi was dead, along with the foreign minister who was traveling in the same helicopter. Much is still unclear about the crash. The official story so far is bad weather, but nothing is ever as it seems in Iranian politics. Many have begun to speculate about more nefarious explanations. Raisi's list of enemies is long, both from without and within. It is not unreasonable to question whether his colleagues conspired to eliminate him. Nevertheless, nervous days are ahead for Tehran. The president is dead, and it comes at a time of great geopolitical strife. On the outside, Iran and its proxies are waging a conflict against America, Israel, and Saudi Arabia. Meanwhile, from the inside, Iran's military and clerical power brokers are battling for the succession of the supreme leader. The death of Raisi deepens infighting within the upper echelons of the theocracy. It changes everything, everywhere, all at once. There is no shortage of conspiracy stories when it comes to Iran. With so many adversaries on all fronts, many Iranians wonder if the accident involved foul play. The finger-pointing has already begun. Israel has come out preemptively saying that it wasn't them, and US officials have backed that up. Still, sometimes truth takes a back seat in geopolitics, and this is precisely the type of narrative that can be twisted toward strategic ends. Ground News, today's sponsor, provides me the tools to consider all these angles for a more comprehensive perspective. On global developments like the events following Iranian President Raisi's helicopter crash, I can access hundreds of articles from both local and regional sources to compare how even opposing sides frame the story. For me, that is invaluable. It's the reason I turn to their app and website whenever I read about current events. It's also why I continue to partner with them. Go to ground.news/Caspian to get 40% off unlimited access to their Vantage plan. That's the one I use for my analysis. Ground News is an exceptional service and I highly recommend it. Iran is not for beginners. It can be perplexing in some ways. The country has an unelected supreme leader at the top, but it also has a democratically elected president. This then makes Iran both totalitarian and democratic at the same time. Seeing it this way goes a long way to explaining why the country is the way it is. After the revolution in 1979, Iran emerged as an Islamic republic. No such system existed at the time, so the leadership had to make up the rules on the go. The result was a government that mashed together two widely different political beliefs. Some parts are elected and some are unelected, but they're both tangled together, like order in chaos. There is considerable tension between these two systems. Iranians elect the president, the parliament, and the assembly of experts, which is the government body that chooses the supreme leader. Tangled interchangeably with the supreme leader is the unelected theocracy, which includes the military, the mosque, the judiciary, and the media, as well as advisory bodies like the Expediency Council and the Guardian Council. The presidency has restrained powers, particularly when it comes to foreign policy. The supreme leader is the one who calls the shots. He sets the tone for domestic and foreign policy, including the country's dress code and nuclear program. But what happens when the supreme leader dies? That is the million-dollar question. Officially, the supreme leader is selected by a group of senior clerics and lawyers who make up the Assembly of Experts, which in turn is elected in a national vote. Raisi was one of the two leading candidates next in line to take the supreme leader's office after his death, the other being Mojtaba. There are some other dark horse candidates, but it's hard to imagine them winning enough support. In Iran's intricate political system, Raisi was considered an ideal consensus candidate. He had overseen multiple branches of the government, and his hardline credentials were unquestionable. The conservative and military power brokers had hoped to employ him to advance their interests. With Raisi gone, however, it is not clear who else could gather consensus to fill that role. Mojtaba is now the only leading candidate left. Even so, the problem with Mojtaba is that he is Supreme Leader Khamenei's second son. Mojtaba has amplified his credentials among the Iranian clergy in recent years, but if he came to power, it would make the theocratic process look like a hereditary transfer of power. Admittedly, Raisi wasn't popular either, but with him out of the picture, Mojtaba now has a clear shot to the top office. Mojtaba is now likely to speedrun through the political system, making allies left and right. His most sought-after objective would be to make a deal with the power brokers from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Doing so would allow Mojtaba to weather any backlash. However, in turn, this would strengthen the role of the military within the country's political and economic landscape. For context, while Khamenei is widely seen as an ultra-conservative leader, he has, on many occasions, intervened against conservatives to support moderate-leaning lawmakers. For instance, he backed Rouhani's rise to the presidency in 2013, and he embraced negotiations with the United States over Iran's nuclear program. A supreme leader lacking such Machiavellian power plays would reinforce Iran's reckless foreign policy driven by the military establishment. So, with a military-backed Mojtaba in power, Iran's political landscape might evolve from a theocratic democracy to something more militaristic. In the decade following, Iran could emerge as less religious conservative at home, but more belligerent abroad. Seen in this way, the death of Raisi will shake politics in Tehran. It will not affect the country's immediate security, but it will cloud the succession of the supreme leader, which, in itself, could evolve Iran's domestic and foreign policy. Few Iranians will mourn Raisi though. They will remember him as the hanging judge, a prosecutor in Tehran who sent thousands of political prisoners to the gallows in 1988. Meanwhile, the younger generation will remember him for his clueless handling of the economy. The president who stocked his cabinet with military men and clerics who watched as the rial nosedived in value in less than 3 years. During his presidency, Raisi rejected to press for domestic change, which is in contrast to his immediate predecessors. Hassan Rouhani, for instance, negotiated the nuclear deal with the West, while Ahmadinejad sought to operate independently from the supreme leader. Raisi, being a conservative insider with close ties to Khamenei, was perhaps the least consequential president in Iran's post-revolutionary history. The theocratic half of Iran's government will now need to reach some sort of consensus on Mojtaba or negotiate for one of the other dark horse candidates, most likely another conservative insider. In the meantime, the democratic bodies will need to find a new president swiftly and at a difficult time. The constitution clearly sets out a succession process. A new election must be held within 50 days. Until then, Vice President Mohamed Mokbir will assume the presidency. What you need to know about Mokbir is that he is a bureaucrat, much like Mike Pence. Mokbir enjoys close ties to Khamenei and the military. He used to handle conglomerates worth tens of billions of dollars for both the supreme leader and the deputies from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Eventually, though, Mokbir will be replaced by someone else. The next presidential election will be crucial. Whoever wins, conservatives or moderates, will likely oversee the transition from Ali Khamenei to a new supreme leader. It will shape the destiny of Iran in the decades to come. However, these power plays come at a time when Iran is engaged in a regional proxy conflict with America, Israel, and Saudi Arabia. Not surprisingly, many Iranians wondered if any of their adversaries had a role in the crash. Last month, Iran came to blows with Israel. The Israelis had assassinated an Iranian general in Syria, and the Iranians retaliated with a volley of more than 300 missiles and drones aimed at Israel. Mossad, Israel's spy apparatus, has a long-standing history of assassinating its foes, including in Iran, where it has eliminated high-profile nuclear scientists. But Mossad has never gone so far as to assassinate a head of state. Doing so would be an explicit act of war that would call for a violent Iranian response. It would be reckless to risk such hostility just to assassinate Raisi, a profoundly unpopular politician who lacks final authority over many of Iran's key policy decisions. So Israel's involvement is unlikely, but that won't stop Iranian officials from promoting conspiracy theories. Either way, Raisi's death will exacerbate infighting within the upper ranks of the elite. This is not a system where people leave empty-handed. If necessary, they can cut off